Welcome to the Nerd Party.
Hi, everybody. Shawn Eastridge here. Welcome to another special Between Takes episode of Missing Frames. We're continuing our coverage here at the Atlanta Film Festival. Make sure you're following us on Twitter at Join Nerd Party and on Instagram at The Nerd Party for all the cool photos. And hey, speaking of cool, let's talk about Birth of the Cool. I'm talking about Miles Davis. There's a new documentary called Miles Davis, Birth of the Cool, and it's absolutely fantastic. I got a screener of this documentary. I've been so looking forward to it. Something I don't get to talk about as much on this podcast because it's so film focused is my love of music. I love music so much, and I get so obsessed with different artists. I want to learn everything about them. Miles Davis is an artist I've always admired and enjoyed, but trying to delve into his story has been a bit daunting. He did so much and he's made so much music. It's sometimes hard to know where to start and the best place to learn about everything he did. Stanley Nelson's new documentary is the perfect entryway. I loved it. Somehow he manages to get the entire spectrum of Miles's life and career into a 2-hour runtime. It's an amazing accomplishment, and I'm so honored Stanley took the time to speak with me about his film. He's such an awesome guy and an incredible filmmaker. Now, for those of you who don't know Stanley's work, I mean, he's one of the great documentary filmmakers ever. He's been in the business for 40 years. It's insane. And he's one of the foremost chroniclers of the African-American experience working in film today. His film, The Black Panthers, Vanguard of the Revolution, is the first comprehensive feature-length historical documentary portrait of that iconic organization, as well as an extremely timely look at an earlier phase of black activism around police violence in African-American communities. It won the 2016 NAACP Image Award, so, no big deal. And again, I mean, if I were to read you a list of all of Stanley Nelson's achievements, this would be another full 30-minute episode, maybe even longer. He's received numerous honors over the course of his career, including the 2016 Lifetime Achievement Award from the National Academy of Television Arts Sciences, and in 2013, he also received the National Medal in the Humanities from President Barack Obama. Again, no big deal. In 2000, Stanley and his wife, Marcia Smith, founded Firelight Media, which is a nonprofit production company dedicated to using historical film to advance contemporary social justice causes and to mentoring, inspiring, and training a new generation of diverse young filmmakers committed to advancing underrepresented stories. So again, this is such a huge pleasure to be able to talk to him about his career, but specifically Miles Davis, Birth of the Cool, this documentary. We talk about his connection to Miles's music, how he got involved in making this film, and the challenges of fitting such a massive career into a digestible 2-hour narrative. We talk about the racism Miles faced. He was amazing and one of the great musicians, and he was so recognizable and famous, but this was the late 50s, the early 60s, so he was not immune to police brutality. But what's amazing about this is he also used his standing and fame to force his record label to celebrate his blackness and the inherent blackness of jazz. There's a really great anecdote here about a certain album cover with a white woman and Miles' reaction to it. It's amazing. I don't want to spoil it for you. It's in the documentary and it's in this interview. We talk about it. But anyway, let's get right into this. I hope you enjoyed this conversation with Stanley Nelson, and I hope you'll check out Miles Davis, Birth of the Cool, when it's in theaters this August. Make sure, if you're not already, to follow Stanley on Twitter at Stanley Nelson1 for updates on the film and his career in general. That's at Stanley Nelson1, the number 1. All right, let's get to it.
Now available to own on video cassette.
Stanley, thank you so much for doing this interview. I'm so excited about this. I caught the documentary Miles Davis, Birth of the Cool, about a week ago. I got a screener for it, and I've got to say, I mean, I've been looking for an entryway to really appreciate Miles Davis even more, and I love his music, and this was such a perfect way to get like an all-encompassing view of the guy and to learn about his life. So thank you so much for that, and thank you for being here.
Oh, thank you. Thanks so much.
Tell me a little bit more about you. Tell me how you got into filmmaking and documentaries in particular.
I mean, I got into filmmaking, I guess it's over 40 years ago now, which is amazing, but almost 40, a little over 40 years ago. And, I was just knocking around school, college, and I took a film course. I was just taking courses and everything. And I took a film course and I really liked it. And I said, hey, if this is, if I can get a degree for watching movies and, writing little dinky papers and going out and making films, that sounds good to me. And so I switched my major to film, and that was at City College here in New York City, and that's how I got into film.
So this got started. I was reading and I watched an interview with you where you mentioned this was back in 2004. The idea of a Miles Davis documentary got thrown to you, and for whatever reason, it was delayed. But talk a little bit more about that and the process of getting this made.
Yeah, well, I'm a great music fan and use a lot of music in my films, and also a great lover of jazz. And 2004 or so, we were talking to American Masters, the PBS show, about doing a film on Miles. And we wrote a script, and we went out to California and met with Miles's family. Then we met with Sony Music, who controls a lot of Miles's music. And we had the real go-ahead. And then for whatever reason, it just fell through. And I don't know exactly why it fell through, but it did. And then about 2 years ago, out of the blue, I just called up American Masters, and there's a new head of the show. And he said, hey, I just got a call, a few days ago from a company in England that wants to do a Miles film, and they can put in half the money and we'll put in half the money, and let's go. And so 2 years ago, we started making the film.
Do you remember when you first discovered Miles Davis?
My father was a big jazz fan. So my father had jazz albums, all around the house. And I remember, Kind of Blue. I remember I stole my father's Kind of Blue album and took it to college when I went to college,
Right.
But I have had, Miles, ever since then, around.
And so what kind of film do you think it would have been if you'd made it back in 2004? Are you glad, just kind of that the fates intervened and somehow it got delayed? Do you think it was better off being made now versus then?
Yeah, I mean, I think hopefully I'm a better filmmaker than I was 15 years ago. I'm not a worse filmmaker. I think that, my ambitions were probably a lot bigger. I think, a lot of the things that we did was still photography and stuff like that we couldn't have done back then. A lot of the ideas would have never surfaced. So I think it's a much better film than it would have been if we had, made the film years ago.
And the film is 2 hours long, and I know you've been hearing this a lot, but it is so well paced. I never felt the length. And I remember getting to the end and I was like, no, let's keep going. I want to learn more. How does that feel? It's almost, I feel like it could be a backhanded compliment in a way with people saying, oh, why didn't you just do a TV series? Right. But to me, that's almost like the best compliment for people to sit down for 2 hours and still want to sit back for another 2 hours. So what was that process like early on? What made you decide to go for a feature versus something like a Netflix series or something like that?
Yeah, well, we'd always looked at it as a film, as a 90-minute or a 2-hour film. That's where we were. But, it's funny because the industry has changed so much that 2 years ago, people weren't thinking about everything has to be, 4 hours, 6 hours, 8 hours. And so there was really not a thought of making it a series. I think, you could make a series, but it would have to be very different than what it was. But, one of the backhanded comments that we did get, after we premiered at Sundance was that somebody said it was too short.
You can't please everybody.
Yeah, I'm not sure what that means to be too short. I would argue that I think that there's so many films and things that come out now, the shows that come out now, that are way too long. There's an hour's worth of plot, this dragged out into 6 to 8 hours.
What were the challenges of that? So when you decided, you were like, it's going to be a 2-hour narrative film, or not narrative, but it's going to have a story from beginning to end. It's going to be contained. What were the challenges then for you? Like I said, this movie is so digestible and it's such a great intro to Miles Davis, and you cover such a wide range. You look at, for me, when I get really into a musician, I'm like, okay, let me jump to the Wikipedia page, and trying to read it and consume all that is so overwhelming. I can't even imagine what the process was like for you. So where did you start with that in terms of what you wanted to tell and what had to go by the wayside?
Well, I think we knew that there were certain things that we have to talk about. Look, you have to talk about Kind of Blue. You have to talk about Bitches Brew. You have to talk about certain things in Miles's life. And I think one of the big decisions for us was to say, okay, we can't talk about every album. Even if we did, if we talked about every album, the film will appeal to only those fanatics. And there's going to be people that say, well, what about this? What about that album? But that we had to choose, the big moments, the big changes in Miles's life and his personal life, and talk about those things. One of the things that's happened in the screenings that we have had is pretty much nobody has come up and said, well, you didn't talk about this. What about that? Because it is fairly comprehensive. I mean, we talk about most of the big changes in Miles' life and the things that he went through. Somebody just said to me the other day, they said, I thought the whole film was going to be about Birth of the Cool. So I was surprised that it wasn't just about that one album. But then after I got over that, I really liked it.
Nice. And is there a particular phase of Miles' career that you prefer, like, over any other? Is it all, like, are you just like, I need it all of it is fantastic?
I mean, my own personal preferences, like so many. I mean, I love the Kind of Blue. I love the Kind of Blue band. I love that whole Miles and Coltrane piece. I think that's just incredible. And one of the things that I really got into in making the film was the second quintet, Herbie Hancock, Wayne Shorter, Tony Williams, and Ron Carter. That quintet I got into because one of the things that's said is that that's the greatest small group that's ever been assembled. And I felt, that for me, it was really important to understand, like, how could this group be better than the quintet with John Coltrane? How is that possible? So I listened to that music a lot, and I mean, they are definitely the equals of John the Coltrane Quintet. I'm not going to argue that they're better, but they are something different, and they're just as good.
One thing that was fascinating, and I kind of knew this because I'd listened to Kind of Blue and I'd listened to Bitches Brew, and I knew he was super eclectic and that he was always about staying on top of trends and innovating. And I love the quote early on where basically I think he says something along the lines of, you have to innovate. That's how you survive. And that was such a fascinating thing to learn about. In terms of innovation, for you as a filmmaker or artists in general, what is your opinion? And do you think that was a key to his success and why he stayed relevant?
I mean, I think the thing about Miles is that he changed constantly, but he didn't change just to change. He changed because he heard something different. He heard something different, which is different from, so many times, jazz musicians will say, I'm going to do a reggae album.
Yeah.
It's like, just some corny reggae, or let's just do Brazilian or something. Like, Miles didn't do that. I mean, he never did that. It was more, he was motivated, and he, Sketches of Spain is something, very, very different than everything else.
And I love that you have Miles play an active part in this documentary, like using those passages from his autobiography. Talk a little bit about that decision. How early on was that going to be a part of it?
Yeah, I mean, that happened really early. So what happened was that, Quincy Troop, who wrote the autobiography with Miles, and, I kind of know, he lives in Harlem and I live in Harlem. So, kind of know each other a little bit. And I had heard that I think I saw him at a party actually years ago. And he said, I have all these tapes of Miles talking that's how we did the album. So, I mean, the book. So I called him up and I went to see him, and he had like 40 or 50 tapes, these little cassette tapes. And the way he wrote the book was just to put a little old style cassette recorder on the table and talk to Miles. And Miles would just talk, and they would talk and stuff like that. And so our original plan was to use those tapes as a basis of Miles's story, to have like Miles narrate his own life to Miles from his autobiography. And we struggled with that, for months and months and months. But the tapes were not great quality. They would be, there'd be a TV on in the background, or radio. They would order food, and you'd hear them go to the door to get the food, and then they start.
It's great if you wanted to do a day in the life with Miles. That's the sequel.
And the tapes are their own thing, but it was impossible for us to fashion the track of Miles from the tapes. And so, after struggling with that for a long time, we said, okay, let's think about using his autobiography and other interviews that he did, and having an actor kind of play Miles and voice Miles's. But so that's what we ended up doing. So all where you hear Miles in the film, it's all from Miles's words, but it's an actor, Carl Lumley, reading Miles.
And he's fantastic. It's so good and it's so engaging. And another thing that I don't know why this shocked me, because it was the time that Miles was making music, but the moment the police officer who approaches him outside and just hits him over the head, which was stunning to me. And again, I say that because it shouldn't be stunning and it's horrible, but the way that shaped him and the way it shaped his music, it's such an important part of who he is. But talk a little bit about that. Talk a little bit about how Davis persevered in this era where this prejudice existed and how he was able to push past that and make such amazing music.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one of the dimensions to the film that really works and is really important. So it's not just a film about this musician, but it's also a film about race and a film about the times. That Miles Davis grew up in East St. Louis. His father was a dentist. His grandfather owned a lot of land, nearby. And Miles had a horse, at his grandfather's farm. And that's how Miles, we had someone who said, they used to call him Little Rich Boy, because he had a lot of money. I mean, for the Black community, in those days, in 1926 when he was born. So Miles grew up very, very wealthy, but he also grew up, in this very segregated, very racist town of East St. Louis. So that's how he starts out. When Miles gets beat up, or hit by the cop, it changed his life in many ways, because Miles had just come out with Kind of Blue. Kind of Blue had just come out, and he realized that this was like this amazing, piece of music. It's Kind of Blue is still, the largest selling jazz album in history. It's still, it still might be on the top 10, any given week. If things are slow, then Kind of Blue rises to the top again. So Kind of Blue had just come out. Miles is playing on 52nd Street downtown in New York. His name is up in lights on the marquee. Right. To smoke a cigarette. It's also just mentioned aside, but he also, as he says, he walks this pretty white girl outside to get a cab. And this cop observes him and tells him, you got to move on, and just harasses him. And Miles refuses and gets beat up by the cop. And one of the things for us as filmmakers where there are all these pictures that were taken, Miles in the police station and being arrested because they beat him up, then they arrest him, right outside of the club with his name in lights,
There are the couple, I mean, there's the one where he's looking right at the camera and it's haunting.
Yeah. Marcus Miller, who plays with Miles, in his last stages, in the late 80s and early 90s, he says that, Miles would just talk about it still, whatever that was. Almost 40 years later, Miles would still just say, that goddamn cop, he would still talk about it, and it affected him. And it, as someone says in the film, it says to Miles that it doesn't matter what you do. You can't get away from this thing that exists in the United States. Your name is up in lights, you're the talk of the town, but cop tells you to move on, you've got to either move on or take the beating.
I mean, the movie's brutally honest. It doesn't shy away from stuff like that. And additionally, I feel like there's a way to do this movie where you almost try to turn a blind eye to some of the darker aspects of Miles' personality, which you embrace him, warts and all. And talk a little bit about that. Why was that important to include in this? It's done in a very tasteful way, but it's very honest.
Yeah, Miles was a rough character. I mean, he was really rough to the people that he loved. We try to show that. I mean, there was no doubt that he loved Frances. This was his first wife, but he was rough, and I think it was really important that we talk about that, Miles, but also that we put it in some kind of context. Again, a lot of we all react to stimuli in a different way. I might have reacted. Who knows? Miles again grew up in a very wealthy situation. He expected something different. Miles dressed in tailor-made suits. He was driving Lamborghinis. He had these beautiful, he's traveling all over. He was Miles Davis, but still he has to take a beating. And so, Miles becomes more and more cantankerous, just a hard guy to live with. And, and part of our dilemma, part of what we thought about all the time in this film was, how does this guy who's so rough, so hard to get along with, make such beautiful music, and how does that happen? And, you know, we were very lucky because one of the scholars we talked to in the film, she says, you know, I think that one of the things it does, you know, music and creativity allows Miles to show a side of himself that he couldn't show,
Right.
couldn't show to the world. And that's that beautiful side of so many of the songs that he recorded.
I love Frances in this documentary is wonderful. She's almost the runaway star. She almost runs away with it.
Frances steals the film, you know.
She's so good.
Frances was Miles's first wife, and you know, she's on the cover of Someday My Prince Will Come. You know, if everybody doesn't know that cover, they should look it up. They should look up Frances. She's one of the most beautiful women.
We'll talk a little bit about that cover because it was a huge thing, and in terms of the release and the way the record label wanted to release that album in the first place. Talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, you know, so many. We actually had a much longer sequence in the film that we cut of jazz albums because jazz albums so often had, you know, white women on the cover. It was just this thing, or they had art, and so they had this art where you didn't see, you know, the musicians. You know, it was you know, avoid the fact that this was, you know, black music made by black musicians. And Miles comes out with Miles Ahead as he's recording with Columbia, and he's making all this money for Columbia. And the first cover has this white woman on the cover on a sailboat, you know, and Miles goes up to George Avakian of Columbia and says, you know, what's that white bitch doing on the cover of my album? You know, and they re-released the album. The next printing of the album has Miles's picture on it. And then when he does Someday My Prince Will Come, he says he wants his wife Frances to be on the cover. He says, this is who this album is for. I'm her prince. She's my princess. You know, I want her on the cover of my album. And the album comes out as a big picture of Frances, who was, well, you know, Frances, like any picture of Frances, she just looks beautiful. I mean, she's like one of those beautiful people, you know, that ever existed. She's just beautiful, and she's also hilarious. And so she talks about the you know, the cover, and we were able to find the pictures, the original behind the scene pictures of them, you know, making her up and getting her ready, and some of the outs from the cover that we use. And again, you know, I mean, Frances passed away right after Thanksgiving.
Right, recently.
And she died, and she didn't ever see the film, but you know, she's definitely takes her star turn, and she deserves it.
Absolutely. And talk a little bit about the interview process. I can't imagine sometimes there's some really emotional interviews, some very honest. How do you as a filmmaker approach these interviews, and how do you, I mean, does it ever get uncomfortable, or do you ever feel like I'm pushing too much, or I haven't pushed enough? You know, like in terms of your approach, you get some really beautiful, honest moments with everybody, but just talk a little bit about that process in terms of interviewing these people.
Yeah, I mean, I think you know, interviewing is a trick. I mean, it's you know, I come very, very, very prepared. I read a whole bunch of stuff. You know, the producer of the film would do kind of pre-interviews. She did most of the pre-interviews on the phone and then write notes. And then we also had anything that was published about the people. We had anything that Miles said in his book about, you know, Frances, Herbie Hancock, and we had all that. I would read through that. I would write questions. And then the trick is to go into the interview and not throw that away, keep that on the side, but listen to what people are saying and try to get to where they're taking me at that moment, and you know, trying to stay with them in that moment. And you know, I mean, my job is to get as much as I possibly can out of people. So you know, when people are being very emotional or saying stuff that's very tricky, I mean, part of me is going like, yes,
yeah,
I got it. You know, the other part of me is trying to keep my face straight and like, not like I'm with you here. I'm very serious.
Right, you empathize, but at the same time, you're like,
at the same time, part of you is thinking, well, this is great for the film.
And I also, you know, we talk a little bit, obviously we don't shy away, or you don't shy away from the darker aspects of Miles' life, but also I thought it was so interesting that you include a talking head with Stanley Crouch when it comes to Bitches Brew, which is such a beloved album, but also a very experimental and divisive album. So I love that you included all
Yeah.
sides of the spectrum with the critical reaction.
Yeah, I mean, we thought it was really important that we talk about, that phase of Miles's music, that a lot of times people ignore, a lot of times people don't like, Bitches Brew. And I mean, Bitches Brew was calm compared to, where he went after that on the corner and Aura and all.
Yeah.
It was really out there, but we feel like it was important for us. We can't ignore it. We can't. And so, I think Carlos Santana talks about how he loves that stuff.
Yes.
And how important it was. And Stanley Crouch is like hilarious because he's like, I didn't know what he was trying to do. Plus, it didn't sound good. we love that quote because it's like this is what a lot of people think. And so we didn't want to like just have Carlos in there saying, "Oh, this is the greatest thing ever," because for a lot of people, it's not.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't like it. I mean, it is. But one thing we wanted to be clear about was that this isn't Miles selling out. Miles selling out would have been him playing Kinda Blue over and over again for 30 years.
Exactly.
Miles could have traveled around the country and they could have put, Miles Davis plays Kinda Blue. And he just played every song on that album, for a set, and everybody would have been like, yay. But it's really challenging, hard, complicated music. Some people like it, some people don't.
Yeah, and that's the thing, that it comes back to Miles' innovation and why he was so important, why he stayed as one of the top guys in the industry. And for you personally, as a filmmaker, how do you apply those lessons, Miles' lessons, to your own work? And what did making this documentary teach you, and some lessons that you'll take moving forward as a filmmaker?
Well, I mean, I look, anybody would be proud to have a career that was, 1/20th of Miles's career, 1/20th of what he did. But I think it's the idea of continuing to change, continuing to create, which I've tried to do. Most of my work is in kind of the historical documentary form. So, I'm trying to, within that form, figure out how to keep going, how to keep getting better, and how to change. It's like if you take jazz is probably too expansive, but if you take something like the blues, how do you still play the blues but innovate and do new things? How do you take reggae and innovate and still do new things within that form? I think I'm trying to constantly, do that, challenge myself, use animation, different kinds of things within documentary film.
It's amazing. It feels like Miles's music is I mean, it continues to be relevant, but especially in this day and age, it feels so important. So what do you think what does his music have to tell us in this day and age? And also, what do you hope audiences take from your documentary?
I mean, I think that Miles's music, I mean, I think that Kind of Blue is a masterpiece. I think it's a classic. I think if you ask me any bit of music that's going to be listened to 100 years from now, Kind of Blue will. There's not much there's not very many musics, maybe the Beatles, but there's not very much music you say, okay, I know, I don't even want to understand a humanity that does not listen to Kind of Blue, that can't understand. There's something so human about that music, and so something so beautiful about that music. And Miles has something to teach us in terms of wanting to continue to develop as an artist, to just continue to develop as an artist. And then there's the negative, of how do you continue to develop and change without kind of cutting the cord everywhere you go? How do you not jettison the things that are good as you advance and change? What I want people to take from the movie, I don't know. I mean, I think that, movies are long and complicated. If you see the movie and say, oh, that was good, let me go get a hamburger, that's fine. If you see the movie and are really affected deeply by the story of this musician, and in some ways the story of this music, that's great too. I mean, I think there's a lot of different ways that you can take Miles Davis' Birth of the Cool.
Yeah. Now everyone talks about Kind of Blue. That's obviously I feel like it's the starting point for anyone who wants to get into Miles Davis. But do you have a personal favorite that you would say, if someone was like, look, give me one album, I've got Kind of Blue, I need to, what else do you got? What else would you recommend for them?
I would recommend, I mean, if you have time to listen, I would recommend stuff from the second quintet, ESP and those albums. I just think, that there's something just incredible going on there. It's more of an interchange within the group that's just incredible. I think that, one thing that I wish we had had more time to spend on is Tony Williams, the drummer, who was actually, Miles actually said it. He was the driving force for the second quintet. He was 17 when he joined the group. We had this whole thing that we actually had to cut about, Tony Williams, because when they would play clubs and he had to have a chaperone, he couldn't get in. So Ron Carter would have to like wait at the door till Tony Williams arrived to bring him into the club and say, no, he's part of the group. And then in some of the clubs, they couldn't serve liquor while they were playing, because Tony Williams was on the bandstand, and Tony Williams would then have to go outside,
right,
intermissions, and then they serve people drinks, and then he could come back in. I mean, he's playing. It's something you really have to listen to. He's playing like 4 and 5 rhythms at the same time. I mean, the guy. It was just in one of the most incredible musicians, and to have this group of Wayne Shorter and Miles and Herbie Hancock be pushed by a 17-year-old drummer out of nowhere is amazing.
That's incredible. And I have one last question. This is kind of unrelated, but so my podcast, it's called Missing Frames. What we do is we watch all the movies we know we should have seen by this point in our lives. Is there a movie, a missing frame in your life, a movie you absolutely know you need to see that you still haven't for whatever reason?
No.
You've seen all of them.
I mean,
God, you're way better at watching movies than I am.
It's so easy to see movies now. I have to say, I grew up at a time, and started my filmmaking career at a time where it was impossible. I mean, I went to film school and you could only see movies when they came to class or when they came to the art house. Now, I mean, if I want to see a movie, I just bring it up, on my TV or on my phone or something and watch it. So I don't know. I mean, there's not very many movies, that I haven't seen. It's only stuff that's coming out maybe that I want to see. But if I want to see a movie, I just see it.
It's easy.
Yes, it's easy. Yeah, so all of you, and if there's this movie, go see. I mean, see it. Bring it up and see it. It's not a big deal.
So when will Birth of the Cool be available for the public to see?
Okay, so Birth of the Cool, we're doing film festivals now, and then we're hoping to have a theatrical release in August.
Awesome, okay.
I think it'll be on American Masters in February of 2020.
I have a very fun story for you. I missed the theatrical screening of the film at the Atlanta Film Festival, but a friend of mine was there, and apparently Paul Giamatti was driving by the Plaza Theater and saw Miles Davis on the marquee, and he said, "Stop the car. This is what I'm doing now." And he just went right into the theater and loved the movie.
Oh,
so.
Wow, that's so great. Yeah, and that's great. I mean, again, we've only probably shown the film about 6 times, so it's a pleasure to talk about the film. It's really a pleasure when anybody says they saw it and liked it. It's really good.
Well, again, it's a fantastic film. Congratulations. I'm excited to see it again when it's in theaters, and I can't wait to recommend it to everybody. So, Stanley, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me today. I really appreciate it.
All right. Thank you so much.